Hey, it's you. Welcome back to the Black Pill. Um, your children don't belong to you. Thesis of the day: your children don't belong to you. I worked for maybe 20 years, give or take, with adults who experience developmental disabilities. Starting in the late 1990s. That was my first real career. That went on about 20 years, give or take. Parents, dude, parents were the worst and the best. Sometimes the best. They had a lot to cope with. Um, the systems, the systems for this care were pretty hostile. They were pretty hostile. The best of the parents were these like powerful advocates, and they learned to go with a certain kind of flow. Uh, they were in their way existential heroes. The thing is, when you find out your child is disabled, it's typical to go through a kind of grief. And how well you do the work of that grief is much to do with how your relationship is going to progress with your children. Mm. The grief isn't for the child. The child is imaginary. I mean, you might find out about trisomy 21, the non eponymous name for Down syndrome. You might find out about that through amniocentesis done, in the early third trimester or something, before the child's even born. They're just an abstraction. They're an idea or an ideal. Even when you're holding a baby in your arms, they're mostly imaginary, right? They're mostly a screen on which your dreams and your hopes and your wishes and your anxieties and stuff are projected. Mm. They can't talk. Babies can't talk. They don't have any ambitions yet. They aren't. In some senses, they're not even really people yet. So the grief isn't for them. The parent doesn't know the child yet. The grief is for those expectations, hopes, dreams, norms, mores. Right? So you're pregnant, or your partner's pregnant. You're going to be a parent. The dreams and hopes get started, realistic or otherwise. Some for yourself. I'm going to be the best, most patient parent, not like my own parents who were assholes. And a lot for that burgeoning new human. They're going to be strong, smart, upright, normal. That includes healthy and heteronormative and stuff. And it might include like obedience and similarity. So a kid's born with a developmental disability, and a parent goes through it, man. A tough time. Maybe it's easier in modernity when people with disability are visible and our mores have shifted at least somewhat on this on this dimension. I sure hear a lot of people going, "So what? We love them no matter what." Uh, I'm not so sure because there's this thing called spiritual bypassing, where we go straight to the conclusion and skip all the work. Right? Live, laugh, love, throw pillows. No bad vibes. Good vibes only on a T-shirt, and I'm like, I'm already splitting, man. Because that person's less likely to be a source of good vibes than a source of toxic positivity. But sure, maybe. There's usually work to do, and the work is parent has to let go. That kid is never going to be who the parent wanted them to be. A doctor, a pilot, an Olympian, whatever the dream was. And the truth is, no child is going to be that. It usually takes longer to figure that out. There's more fighting over it. So James Marcia expanded on Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages, specifically the part in adolescence called identity formation, becoming your own person. Erikson thought, there was winning or losing. You either became your own person and had your identity, or you didn't. You had diffusion, where you're just sort of you go through life. You have 3 jobs in 5 years, and you're not attached to any of them, and you're just sort of drifting along, waiting for something to appeal to you, and nothing ever really does. Marcia, though, imagined there would be 3 ways to fail. There'd be identity diffusion, but there'd also be moratorium. And in moratorium, you put off some decisions until later. You graduate from high school and you don't know yourself, and so you backpack through Europe for a year, ride the rails, and take some good drugs and meet interesting people like that. And if you have money, that can be very choiceful. And if you're poor, sometimes there's less agency in it, and less really good drugs and European people. Yeah. But then there's foreclosure, and foreclosure is when someone else decides your identity for you, right? So around the world, probably the most egregious examples are like slavery, child brides, child soldiers, right? Closer to home, maybe mom and pop run the hardware store in town, and you're going to college to get an MBA, right? And you're taking over the store when they retire. There's no argument about that, right? But I want to sing. No, no, none of that. You know, uh, you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or at the outside a dentist, like your weird Uncle Derek. That's it. Those are the choices. You know. But I don't want that. Well, that's fine, son. But you're paying for college and you're out of the will. That's foreclosure. That bubble's going to burst. Your kids are going to be themselves. Always? No, not always. But it's arguably worse when they don't individuate. When you never have that knockdown drag out about it, never fracture and then repair that relationship, and they grow up, kind of enmeshed or zombified, living somebody else's scripts, all manner of bad. But for most people, we just don't become who our parents wanted us to. But a baby is born with an obvious difference. The bubble bursts right away, and the parent has to deal with it, talk it out, work it out, whatever, and it usually involves a certain amount of pain. You have to let it go. You have to let go. You have to let go. Dreams aren't real. The kid in front of you is. They weren't a person yet, just a person in potentia. That's why Virginia Satir referred to parenting as people making. That kid is going to grow up to be a person, and the parent's job is to maximize their potential. Care, protect, guide, all that stuff. Maximize the agency, their selfhood, which is the ability to make informed choices for and about their self. People aren't things. Children aren't things. You don't own your children. Forcing them into a mold is, well, it's evil. And it might be hate. Look, I'm autistic. I don't suffer from autism. What are you talking about? I sometimes suffer from being treated badly by other people. You know, No one ever suffered from Down syndrome. The folks I work with, man, I love those guys. Some of the just coolest cats and kittens, you know. A certain propensity to watch WWE Raw on Friday nights or something, whatever. But they were all right. They were happy go lucky and had rich and fulfilling lives, and they didn't suffer from Down syndrome. They suffered from discrimination. All right. Yeah, people suffer sometimes from seizures, painful conditions and whatnot. And we can wish that they didn't have to, and we could try and make a bargain with God where I'll take the suffering, like the priest in The Exorcist or something. That's a whole other story. We can also accept them within their limitations while doing everything we can to maximize their agency and potential. All right. Uh, when I was a kid, my best friend had a secret brother. I knew this guy for 4 years when before he let me into his house to meet his older brother, who had Down syndrome. Because my mate didn't know how I would respond to that. Kids are cruel. Even my friends were cruel to me. Jokes and pranks that absolutely would not fly in modernity or in adult life. So this young man just did not know how I would treat him, and he did not know how I would treat his brother when I found out about this. Those boys were adorable together, magnificent. You know, my mate loved his brother totally, completely, wholeheartedly, and also kept him a dirty secret, man. That's hate. That's the action of hate, even if not the emotion of hate, right? Violence is violence whether or not there's sex in it. When I travel in China, I rarely see disabled people in public life. I mean, all right. So long thing about Mao Zedong. Uh, Mao thought that Mao thought that these Soviet agriculturalists knew more than real agriculturalists. They're sort of conspiracy theorists of the age, and so he got his farmers planting in ways that were absolutely goddamn guaranteed to cause a famine. At the same time, um, he was getting people to have lots and lots and lots of children, and so people are having tons of children at the same time they're starving. And so you have a bunch of children who the families can't feed, and they start to sell them to gangs in the big cities. And the gangs put the children on the street to beg and then take all the money that they got from begging, like that. But in fairly short order, there's so many children begging that what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Right? One child is pathetic and you can do something. 100 children, like you just lower your eyes and try and walk past. So they started to maim the children, and to make them more efficacious beggars, to make them seem more pathetic. So when I'm out there, in the middle of a big city, sometimes I'll see these folks who are, they're in their probably mid to late 60s now, and they're missing one or more limbs because they were mutilated by the gangs back in the day, and that most people just ignore them, try and look away, try not to see them. I give them whatever cash money I have in my pocket. So I'll see them sometimes, and blind people. Blind people aren't really permitted in society. They are consigned to life as massage workers. This mythology that because they can't see, they get more information through their hands, and that's their profession. And when people escape that and come to a free country, they almost universally say that they really hated that. They did not love that for themselves, right? They hated having their agency taken away in that manner. China disappears people of disability, and we're headed down that same sort of dark path. We're headed down there right now. Okay, and this talk is not about disabilities. There. You have no particular right to expect your children to follow your religion, to vote for your political party, to have a sexual orientation um, that aligns with your values, to enact the gender that you've scripted for them. They aren't your property. Given freedom, given freedom that we fought for and bled for, people will make choices that we don't like. They'll actualize selves that we don't approve of. It isn't freedom, though, if they can only do what we might want them to do. And the trick to being happy is to let it go. Just let it go. I tell you, me and my spouse, we're academics. Our son is a blue collar dude. He doesn't read. He didn't go to college. The apple not only fell far from the tree, it rolled down the hill, landed in a river, and got swept out to sea. Okay, baby. All right, and we could be happier. Because look, all I ever wanted from him was to be himself, and he is. He's totally, completely, and in all other ways himself. Not wanting your kid to be a blue collar worker is a kind of hate, specifically classism. Not wanting them to be gay is a more definitive kind of hate. Sooner or later, sooner or later, you have to grieve your dreams. You have to accept what is, who is. And maybe that is hard. Hey, 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 drowning is not the worst way to go. When you ask Americans, given the inevitability of your death, what are the ways you'd prefer to go and what are your least favorite ways? Drowning and burning are the scariest ways to people. At least in America, they're the scariest ways to go out. But like sometimes people fall overboard from their crab boat or whatever, and they get pulled down and they drown, and someone drags them back up on the deck a few minutes later, and they're dead. They have died of hypoxia, and then they're resuscitated, and they can tell you what it was like to drown. So it's not the worst way to go, actually. It's not the worst way to go. They say that the worst part of drowning is actually trying not to drown. That is, trying to hold your breath and fight to figure out which way is up and stuff, and the burning and the pain and the panic, that is really terrible. But eventually, your body is going to force you to start breathing the salt water. And that stings for a second, and then you get used to it, and the body's doing what it needs to do, that respiration thing, and the panic starts to fade away. Sink, get really cold, sink, start to drift away. They describe it like once you're over the panic, dying this way is like going to sleep. It's very peaceful. It's very peaceful. It's even a little bit euphoric, maybe. It's like that. It's like that. Your kids are not your property. Your children are not your property, and you owe them their agency. This is America, land of the free, right? You owe them their agency. It is inevitable that they're gonna not be who you planned for them to be in one way or another or many ways, right? It's inevitable, and resisting that just makes it worse in the end. Your children don't belong to you. They belong to themselves. Black pill out.